humans are super capable of change across every area of life in my experience. And if there's an area of your life you want to change, like find someone else who's changed that. Find the playbook. The playbook's out there forever. It is you want to change, whether it's your career, your business, your fitness, your substance use, whatever, and just follow the directions.
In this episode of Investors and Operators, I am chatting with Tayler Wallace. He has gone from technologist to doggy daycares. So we're going to cover a lot in this episode. And Tayler and his co-founder now run an 8-figure multi-unit doggy daycare business with 4 locations and growing. Recently partnered with one of our clients, Pet Resort Hospitality Group. And in this episode, we're going to talk about everything from that journey of going from technology to running doggy daycares, partnering with private equity, what went through your mind going through this, pros and cons and considerations, and a whole bunch of other topics. So Tayler, I'll pause there, turn it over to you, and love to hear just kind of the big picture background before we dive into building the business.
Yeah, Jordan, thanks for having me, and it's been great working with you in 51 Labs. Yeah, my backstory is kind of a winding journey, little here, there, and everywhere. I went to college in Scotland, studied English literature, wanted to be a poet and a golfer, and realized very quickly that that doesn't really pay the bills. And I also loved working with teams and not sitting in a room and writing by myself. So I kind of fell in love with technology, and after that experience, I moved to New York City and worked for the first startup that would hire me, and kind of very quickly figured out how the internet worked. And a year out of school, I started an early stage tech company with a cousin, and we spent the next 5 years building mobile apps, first consumer focused, and then eventually pivoted and built an enterprise product kind of similar to Slack, but really photo and video centric. Raised a bunch of money, tried to go viral, then tried to kind of build a B2B product, and it never really took off. So at 27, been doing this for about 5 years. We wound that down, and we built that company in Tampa. So that kind of came down here from New York. Spent 5 years here. And during that time, I got sober. And while getting sober, I met my now business partner. He took a job trying to kind of figure out what to do with his life, scoop and poop at a doggy daycare. We became roommates, and he quickly became the manager of that doggy daycare. So like I'm running this tech startup, he's running this doggy daycare, and we're trying to like figure out how to rebuild our lives and build these very different businesses and kind of swapping notes every night. And I saw that he was really doing all the work, and he had an absentee owner that was making all the money, and I knew how to raise money and kind of build a small business, and was like, hey man, someday like let's do this together. And yeah, so I wound down the startup, and that was kind of like the dream. Someday we'll come back together and do a doggy daycare. But I was kind of over Tampa and wanted to travel. So I took a first kind of freelance digital nomad job that would hire me. And I spent the next 3 years basically being like a tech gunslinger, sort of any startup that would pay me more, I'd move and go work for you. And I went from Europe to Israel to Jacksonville, Wyoming to LA, San Francisco, Miami. And I got a little burnt out on that after about 3 years of living in a suitcase. And when I moved to Miami, I was working for a very large augmented reality startup there, billions in funding, and was helping with their go-to-market strategy, and was really excited about it. Was like, all right, I'm gonna sign a lease for an apartment in Miami. I'm gonna buy a bed for the first time in years, and sort of like let's have a home base here. And that was in February of 2020. The whole world shut down a month later, and I'm sitting in, this beautiful apartment in Miami, and I get laid off. So now I have no income and I have no friends and I don't know anybody in Miami. And I'm like, all right, like, what do we do now? Um, and so I ended up coming back to Tampa, just kind of staying with family in early COVID, regrouping and trying to figure out what my next step was. And Mike, my partner, and I regrouped, and he was like really ready, I think, to do his own thing. And I was pretty burnt out on tech and was open to kind of different ideas. And I got recruited by a private equity firm that was doing a pet tech roll up. So I was like, oh wow, like private equities in the pet business, like this is interesting. Like maybe there's more here than I thought beyond just my buddy running a good small business. And the more I researched the space, like the more I kind of saw the tailwinds coming, and everybody was talking about all these COVID puppies. And yeah, we started looking for an entry point, and kind of long story short, we found a small business to acquire in the fall of 2020, and um, we doubled revenue there in 6 months. And I was consulting half time for a VC firm for the first year. And after we doubled revenue in 6 months, I was like, all right, this is an interesting business. Like maybe let's do more of these. So we acquired a second location in the fall of 2021, doubled revenue there again in about 6 months. So really kind of like honed in on, hey, how do we really grow this thing? So subsequently, we've done in the last 2 years since that second acquisition, we've done a de novo that we just opened in January. We've done another acquisition, and then yeah, we just partnered with PRHG to kind of help continue supporting that growth.
Well, we can take this in a lot of different directions.
Yeah, that's the last 12 years.
That is awesome. Um, how did you acquire the first business? Like, how did you find out about it? Did you just cold call them? How did you kind of get the first deal done? And then how did you double the business in 6 months?
Yeah, so the first one, the acquisition story is kind of funny. We initially approached my partner's current owner, and he was in a large franchise system, and she owned a couple units in that system, and we were like, hey, this seems like a natural start, and she just wanted a crazy valuation for the business to what we could afford at the time and what we thought it was worth. So that became a non-option pretty quickly. But he knew franchising, and I was like, I don't really want to be in this business at the time. I want you to be able to run it. So maybe a franchise is smart. So we looked at some of the other franchise systems in the space, and the more we dug into it, like he loved some of the ops side to some of the franchises, and then I would hate their marketing and sales. And then I would fall in love with the sales and the marketing of another franchise, and he would be like, I hate their ops. So we sort of got to this place of like, we don't really need a franchise. Like you have the ops experience, I have the sales, marketing, fundraising. Like, what do we need to pay them 10% of revenue for? Um, so we had kind of decided to roll our own. And one of the franchisors we were talking to was like, hey, we want you to buy this independent and convert it. And we were like, well, let us look at it. And they were like, we'll only let you look at it if you sign a franchise agreement and write us a $50,000 check. And we were like, we'll sign an agreement saying we won't buy it, but I'm not going to pay you 50 grand before I see it. And they wouldn't do that. So we just called all the daycares in Tampa and figured out which one of them was for sale and bought that one.
And what was that conversation like? I mean, did you literally just cold call and be like, hey, I'm Taylor. I'd love to buy your business. Like, I think there's so much, mystique around that. And like, how did you, make that first call? How'd you approach them?
Yeah, I mean, that one was kind of interesting because we sort of knew there was a doggy daycare in Tampa for sale because this franchisor was looking at it. We just
Yeah.
didn't know who it was. So we kind of narrowed it down to, who we figured it was. And it ended up being Paws and Rec, which is who we bought. And we called him up and we're like, hey, here's our background. My partners run the Camp Bow Wow by the airport forever. And we're interested in starting a business, but we figured we'd call you guys and see if you ever had any interest in selling. And they were like, actually, we're for sale. And we were like, no way, we had no idea. And but then subsequently, I mean, we've approached probably 150 other doggy daycares in Florida since then. And the conversation is generally basically that is like, hey, here's what we do. We've been acquiring doggy daycares. We're in the business. We love what you guys have built. Would you ever be interested in selling? And they're either like kick rocks, I'm never selling this thing, or, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, I'd love to chat. And we generally try to get face to face as soon as we can and kind of have a conversation and check out the facility and go from there.
It's such an interesting way of finding out how to meet the seller or how to meet the owners, how to meet the managers, and all the different ways to triangulate information. Like, we had a plumber come in last night, and as they were here for 6 hours, I'm asking them questions like, how many plumbers do you have? How many electricians do you have? When was the business started? Oh, you were bought 2 years ago. What's the name of that company? And then like I'm trying to like, well, how much you're charging me 2 grand to do this? How many jobs are you doing in a day? You're doing 3 jobs. You have 11. You're doing 8 mil a year. It's like it's so much fun, just the business of find out how to connect with sellers and see if there's alignment. So you got your first partner with the first company. How did you double sales in 6 months? What are some of the key levers?
Yeah, I mean it's people always ask that question and it's there's not really a super exciting answer. It was basically we saw the facility we bought and a lot of the all three of the facilities we've acquired we basically saw the capacity where they what they were currently running at, and my partner having 10 years of franchise training in a very high level franchise is like I can double the amount of dogs we fit in here every day. And me having 10 years of marketing and tech experience, I'm like, cool, I can get you enough leads to double the dogs. So the two main levers are really occupancy, which involves kind of a bunch of smaller levers around, the footprint and the flow of the facility, the day to day, the staff, training them to be able to handle more dogs, sort of all of that operational stuff. And then just making sure you can get enough dogs to show up to meet that increased capacity that we have.
And then, I mean, that kind of played into like your expertise with sales and marketing and being able just to add in top of the funnel.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the thing that I've loved about coming from tech to kind of small business, brick and mortar, something a little bit more traditional is it's not rocket science, right? It's like there's kind of a formula and we try to do sort of everything in the formula just better than everybody else, and tech is like you got to make something 10x better, and small business, if you're twice as good as the guy next door, you're going to win all day.
It's interesting when you look back on both experiences. What would you advise somebody who's younger in their career doing? Because like I think back to now, like I started my own tech business. It was a debt financing platform, and I look back on what I'm doing. I'm like, I would never do that again because I don't have that. I don't have a big technology problem that I need to solve that needs venture
Yeah.
backing and playing that game. I love what we
Totally.
do. Like I would love owning
Yeah.
an HVAC business
Yeah.
and partnering with that as opposed to like trying to
I've
start the
had the
next.
same experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, of just of going from like when I was really kind of evaluating, hey, do I want to leave tech behind? It was like I felt like I had spent 10 years trying to change the world and it really didn't change much. Like we were constantly kind of working on inventing solutions to maybe problems that didn't even exist, or weren't really that important. And I started to feel like I was doing that to the detriment of like having any actual impact on a community. And I coupled that with sort of all this travel. And I was like, the times I was sort of felt the most joy in life is when I was like actively impacting a community. And that was sort of one of the pools of small business is like, can I, similar to the work you're doing with your nonprofit is like, I want to focus on doing sort of the small things right. And let's focus on like the actual human to human customer experience in a community where we can provide a good service. And if that works, then let's try to figure out how to scale it up instead of being like, I'm going to invent the next, you know, Facebook that impacts 7 billion people. Um, and yeah, it's been a really nice change, I think, to shift that focus from having this massive ambition that felt like it really didn't have a ton of real impact to just being like, let's focus on having low level impact and then creating way more impact than I ever had before.
Yeah. And it makes me think about this idea of how we're trying to measure success and what that actually means and getting a return on life. And this made me think when I was going back in 2019, transitioning from the first nonprofit to the second, I was like, how many veterans do I need to support and in order to feel like I'm happy or fulfilled? Like, is it the 101st? Is it 500? Is it 1,000? Is it 10? Like, how many emotional points do I need to get till I feel happy and fulfilled and like I'm having an impact? And it just made me completely think about this framework of success. And it became more qualitative instead of quantitative. And like, I just need to have a smaller group of people that I really care about and that I truly know. And if I can make a difference in their life, then that's success to me. But I don't need to have 1,000 members, 5,000 members in this organization.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of where I landed too, is like instead of trying to create some technology that impacts people for 5 seconds and you impact a billion people, it's like, maybe I should focus on like creating a couple really great jobs, and having that really kind of deep impact rather than like broad touch. Um, and for me, that's been a lot more fulfilling.
So talk about the growth after the first location, second, third, and fourth, and then why'd you decide to um, partner with PRHG?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. After the first one, like I said, I was half time for the first one, where it was really like
Yeah.
my buddy was running the day. I mean, it was a small business. I mean, truly sub million in revenue when we bought it, and enough to support him and I kind of making enough money to eat, but not beyond that. And the goal for me was like, hey, I'm going to be an investor in this. I'll sort of help him grow it, and we'll see where it goes. But then when we bought the second one, it was like, okay, like let's focus on this for a bit and see where it goes. And after we doubled revenue at the second location, it was like, okay, like clearly we're good at this. Like we know how to run these, we know how to buy them, we know how to grow them. So how do we do more? And I have like, I come from VC tech. Like I didn't know anything about private equity. I'd never really heard of a roll up before doing this. I sort of knew it was a thing, but my context for private equity was like sometimes private equities buy tech companies instead of them going public or buying each other, and that was about it. So I really started learning about kind of M&A and entrepreneurship through acquisition, and then subsequently like lower middle market private equity and what that looks like. And we had a couple great investors in the original business, and they encouraged us to kind of grow, but we were really focused on like let's not grow too fast. Let's do kind of synergistic acquisitions within 100 miles of our existing locations. We decided to build a de novo, so we had a comp to understand like, hey, maybe it's better to build these than buy them. We've never done that. Let's try that. Um, and it just went slower than I think we wanted to go, and that we could handle. Like we had a lot of capacity. We were like, we could be doing more facilities. But because our targets were so close to Florida, there's not that many, or to Tampa, there's not that many dog daycares within 50, 100 miles. So pretty quickly, we kind of tapped the available targets. And our existing investor base was not super comfortable with us kind of going out of state or making kind of less strategic acquisitions that we had done before. And the de novo took way longer than we expected. So we sort of got into this place where like my partner and I were very hungry. We felt like we had a lot of capacity and energy and capability to grow the business. And we wanted to sort of have an investment partner that was as hungry and excited to go as hard as we were. So we weren't really looking for private equity, but we were kind of getting to that point of like, we need to figure out, are we just going to cash flow this thing and I'm going to go get another job, and the 3, 4 facilities we have are going to run themselves, or are we going to go raise equity ourselves? And PRHG came knocking, and we spent a ton of time getting to know them, and felt like, you know what, like this is a really interesting opportunity for us personally. Take some chips off the table and kind of de-risk what we've done for the last couple of years, but at the same time, like really have a partner that wants to push us like we want to push ourselves.
What were some of the difficult questions you had to work through before deciding to truly partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one initially was kind of vision and values of like we both consistently were like, we're having a lot of fun doing what we're doing. And I think for the first time in both my partner and I's careers, like we really felt like this is awesome. We're having a blast. We're having a lot of impact. Our customers love us. Our staff really enjoy their jobs. And we didn't want any of that stuff to change. We also wanted to keep doing what we were doing. So the idea of like selling the business and kind of walking away was like very unattractive to us. So we wanted to make sure that a partner for us was somebody who was like super excited to have us in the business, and was going to kind of allow us to keep doing what we loved, and wasn't going to be super hands-on and controlling about the day to day. Um, and that takes a while because it's like, a guy calls you on the phone and is like, hey, I'm interested in partnering with you. And you're like, I don't know you from Adam. Like, how do you sort of feel that out? So it was months of kind of back and forth with them, really getting to know them. And then I think the other one is sort of a recognition of just like you go from being a controlling owner in a business to not being the controlling owner, and that's a mindset shift, right? And there's kind of a level of acceptance there that you need to come to terms with, especially when you want um to continue being in the business and growing it. But I think again, like coming from tech, like most tech founders very quickly get diluted beyond 51% ownership. So I was kind of familiar with that. It was just a matter of kind of making sure we were comfortable with who we were doing that with. And yeah, I mean, thus far it's been great. I mean, we've been very happy with the partnership, and we're just getting started with them, and the kind of ambition that we've expressed, they're all for. So we're looking at a bunch of other targets we wouldn't have looked at without them. We're looking at doing more de novos and build outs, and they've added a layer of real estate support that we didn't have before. And so yeah, I mean, I think it's early with them, but we're all very excited about it.
What other support do they provide? What does that mean, like real estate support?
Yeah, so that was like one of our biggest kind of holes between my partner and I, is like we'd sort of built everything that you could build in an existing doggy daycare, but the kind of like, hey, let's go hire an architect and a general contractor and do the whole rigmarole and permits and all that. And we did that in St. Pete, and it was like, oh my gosh, was that painful? And we have no idea what we're doing. So we learned a ton, and we kind of know how to do it now. But we have, Miguel is the head of real estate at PRHG, and he's managed thousands of development projects on kind of box type businesses, retail businesses. So just the wealth of experience he's brought, helping us kind of get through some of these processes, managing general contractors, has been really great. I think the finance side is also interesting. Like I'm an English major, right? Like everything I know about Excel, I've sort of Googled. And the first financial model I did for our first acquisition, I was terrified it was going to be off. And luckily it was off, but we were off in the right directions. So it's just having guys that have sort of done everything that we've done in different facets, and that level of kind of expertise around it is really exciting. It's like one of the things that can be challenging going from, like a high tech career to a small business, is like you go from one being surrounded by knowledge workers to being surrounded by young people that play with dogs. So being surrounded by kind of professional peers again has been really fun.
So shifting gears a little bit, you'd mentioned just kind of this journey around sobriety, and I'm curious kind of what that was like. When was it? And just kind of, what you experienced. And I'm asking also because I was looking at my Evernote journal, and I searched alcohol, and I was like, this has showed up 20 times in the past year when I've noted like Friday night, drank a bottle, watched 3 episodes on Netflix. Guess who's not waking up at 4:30 to do 5 hours of Ironman training? And I'm asking this because I'm kind of exploring my own journey and what's the right in state for me. But the way I've experienced it is kids are in bed at 8 or 8:30, and then you know what? I'll have a beer. I'll have 2 glasses of wine. It's Friday. It's been a long week. I think I'm going to have a bottle of wine. And guess who? I just don't wake up at 4:30 to go do my long run, to go do my long bike. So for me, it's less about the every single day and it being debilitating. It's more just like feeling like a C player or a D player. And oh, we're going out on a video shoot. Oh, cool. Guess what? Per diem $75. I got 25 left. Yes, I'm going to get that glass of wine and that beer. It's like, how do I go from, how do I be an A player is where I'm trying to get at, and trying to find a good in state. So what we've done in the past month is we just don't drink at home, but I'm trying to do, like, if I go out, then I'm going to experience it. And we have non-alcoholic beer at home, and I'm seeing if I can handle that, or if I just need to go like, you know what, I can't. But I'm curious to hear your journey and what you went through.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of like not being an A player all the time was a big part of it for me. I think the maybe difference in my story is I had no off switch. So I would consistently say like, "Hey, I'm gonna have 2 glasses of wine and watch Netflix on Friday," and like I would have a lot more than 2 glasses of wine, and and I would say I'm gonna have one or two, and I would not have one or two. And I'd kind of been that way for years, but I had always been called a B plus player. Like I always did well in school. I did well professionally, and just I had found kind of from an early age, like my hobby, the way I kind of unwound and relaxed, really increasingly became partying and alcohol. Um, and I'm running this startup, and I'm 24 or 25. I'm kind of out of college for a couple years, and I have a lot of responsibility. I got 10 employees, and I'm finding myself like all I do is work and then have cocktails after work. That's like how I unwind. It's how I unplug. It's how I celebrate. And I started to recognize like similar kind of awakening. It sounds like you're happening, but definitely more extreme, I think, usage than you're describing. Um, that like this was not healthy and this is not how I wanted to live. But for me, it was like the more I tried to control it, the worse it got. And it ultimately for me came down to like this is a binary thing. Like I don't that was a process to get there, but it was like it's all or nothing. And I'm kind of like that with a lot of stuff. And being sober for almost 10 years now, I see that in a lot of areas of life. So yeah, like I eventually in 2014 just gave it up and through a lot of help with other guys that are in recovery and sober and it's been an amazing journey and what I found today is if you can have one or two, I think that's awesome and more power to you, but that doesn't work for me. But I know for a fact that you can have a phenomenal life without ever drinking alcohol because I've had one. Um, and I haven't woke up hungover in 10 years. I've definitely skipped a lot of Ironman training sessions, but not because I had too many glasses of wine. And yeah, I think what I've learned too is like people drink because they enjoy the effect produced by alcohol. And I think recognizing like what about that effect that I like, um, and does the benefit of that effect sort of outweigh the cost? And for me, the cost was heavy because I was a heavy drinker. Um, and I then had to learn other coping mechanisms, ways of celebration, ways of social bonding and connectivity and unwinding that didn't revolve around alcohol at all. So I've become kind of a broadly healthier person because I can't reach for a glass of wine when I want to chill on Friday because I'll end up naked and in handcuffs. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't it doesn't work for me.
How long did it take for you to realize, like I'm at this next stage of I'm growing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole time from when I started drinking to when I quit, there was like an underlying, like, you're probably overdoing it. And I definitely had moments where it was like, yeah, and you really overdid it, but I was always able to kind of like drill it back. And like my life never fell apart in any respect. But the last like year, it was increasingly like noticeable. And I was telling myself, like, I want to stop.
Yeah.
And then the first couple years of not drinking, like I was just very involved in recovery communities. Like Mike, my partner, he's in recovery, and it was like I swapped the drinking for like hanging out with sober men,
Yeah.
and doing that. And then when I went traveling, like one of the things that was kind of a big question for me is like I traveled a lot with alcohol, and like when you're solo traveling with alcohol, you go to the bar and you meet people, or you stay in a hostel and alcohol becomes sort of the lubricant to your loneliness and your aloneness. Um, but I really wanted that experience in sobriety, and I went to kind of a lot of sober men, and they was like, hey, can I do this, go travel, live in a suitcase, and do the digital nomad thing without drinking? And they were all like, dude, if you do what you do here, you can do it anywhere. So I had this 3 year kind of solo travel experience in sobriety that really codified like my love for being in recovery and finding recovery communities all over the world and connecting with people in recovery from Israel to Berlin to Jackson Hole, Wyoming to LA and San Francisco and Miami and yeah, that was just like such a beautiful experience that like really kind of, I think, codified that like this is a way of life for me now.
How much did you drop in weight after like 6 months of after the first 6 months?
Well, so it's I probably gained 10 or 20 pounds because I swapped the booze
You're
for the
making
pizza
up for it in
and
chocolate and
hamburgers.
ice cream.
Yeah, oh yeah. Um, but eventually, my fitness journey kind of started. I moved to LA as part of that travel experience, and I was living next to the original Gold's Gym. And I worked out in high school and college. I was a swimmer and a water polo player, and but really from like college to the age of 28, like I hadn't done much but play golf and occasionally go for a hike. But I'm living in LA, and like I've changed a lot, but like physically I haven't changed. And everybody in LA is hot and fit, and I had kind of always wanted to get into fitness. So I started going to CrossFit, and then that kind of snowballed. And eventually, when I moved to South Florida, I couldn't find a CrossFit gym I liked, so I started training for triathlons, and eventually did some marathons and did a couple triathlons. And I think the recovery thing, like one of the things it teaches you is how to be a beginner again. And to not know how to do something. And also it really shows you that like maximum change as possible. Like I've seen people come from the absolute gutter and completely transform their lives and become multimillionaires, or lead nonprofits or get their families back together. So you sort of start to see that in others and in yourself, and you sort of you develop this idea that like massive change is possible in my life if I just sort of figure out what the playbook is and follow the directions. And training is very directionally based. It's like pick up a trainer, pick up a coach, follow the directions, and do these workouts 6 days a week for the next 16 weeks, and you'll probably be able to do a half Ironman.
Yeah. It's so I mean for people who are listening to this and who want to get help, who might be in a similar state where you were, of just like where do they start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk to anybody about it, right? Like there's been so many people that have helped me. Yeah, it's
But is
the
there
best
like
thing I
a
would suggest.
particular, go ahead.
Find someone else that you know that's in recovery, right? That's the best starting point. And my handle on Twitter is at Taywall. Send me a DM. I'm happy to kind of private message you more details about what my journey's been like. Um, but there's plenty of support groups out there. The one thing I generally tell people is find somebody who is in recovery and has a story similar to yours. I tried to find people that drank responsibly and talk to them about it early on, and that didn't work for me because I couldn't do that. So I think it's sort of like find someone that has what you want, right? And ask them how they got it and follow the directions.
So over to the fitness part, like what was your first marathon? How'd you get into tries?
Yeah, first marathon was New York City, which is the sweetest adult sport thing I think you can do. It's probably as close as I'll ever get to feeling like a football player that walks into an NFL stadium on Sunday afternoons, because it's just like hundreds of thousands of people cheering for 4 hours, and it's just such a rush, man. It was an absolute blast. Um, but yeah, like I kind of always had this idea that running was a sweet thing to do, but I always hated running, and I was a swimmer, so like I had some of that background, but um the more I did it, like the more I kind of fell in love with it. And I was never a great athlete. So the idea of sort of saying, "Hey, I'm a marathoner and an Ironmaner," and doing that later in life was just kind of like I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, I think, with fitness. So that was definitely a driver. And it's also just been a great way for me to clear my head, and talking about those like healthy coping mechanisms of I went for a run this morning, and like I've been feeling a little stressed, and I came back from that run. I'm like, I feel great. The day's awesome. I'm alive. Like, what am I worried about?
It's interesting because in, let's see, 4 years of training, there's not been a single time when I've come back from a workout and felt worse. And
Yeah.
even when it's 8:30 or 9 p.m., and then Jingle kick me and she's like, "Hey, you need to do 6 miles."
Yeah.
Of like, I know that you're tired, get out of the bed, go to the gym and go do what you said you would do. And I always feel better after that. And it's interesting because I think it's actually more intimidating than it actually is. in terms of getting into half marathon, marathon, or longer distance tries. Um, and it just starts with these simple steps like go off and walk outside for 10 minutes, and then it builds and it builds and it builds.
Totally.
Um, it's when you look back at your story building the business, like if we could kind of summarize just like what was the key motivation of what has kept you going, the hard times of entrepreneurship, like how would you identify what is your biggest motivator that keeps you going and building this business?
Yeah, I don't think there's one um primary one. I mean, I think I have like an innate desire to succeed personally. Like I'm an achiever. I like doing big hard things. Um but I also really love the opportunity we've been able to create for a lot of people on our staff. I think that's been really awesome. The opportunity my partner and I have created for each other just as partners. Like we very much are in a business where like neither one of us could have done what we did without the other. And that's a really cool thing to kind of have that type of partnership with someone. Um, and I love dogs, so that's also been really fun is like to build a business where you're taking care of dogs, taking care of people's dogs, making people happy. Um, and it's fun. I mean, I think for me, like I want to have like the maximum life experience in all aspects of it. And business has sort of been the one career that I think allows me to touch as much of life as I want to, where it's like, today it's I spend the morning kind of thinking about real estate. I spend the afternoon thinking about customer service. I spend, an hour talking to you on a podcast, and I'm going to go hang out with the guy tonight who is a boat builder that helped us design kennels. And it's like, I get to sort of touch economics and politics and finance and sort of all of these areas of life that really scratch my curiosity. And I love that about business and entrepreneurship is just how much you get to do and see and experience and learn about the world and how humans kind of interact and interrelate. So yeah, I think if I were to like really drill a primary motivator, it's just like I want more life. And business for me has sort of been the best venue for that professionally.
Who should not be an entrepreneur? What are
Um,
reasons to go to truly stay down the employee track? And I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts. I've been thinking about it's been something that's top of my mind lately because I used to think entrepreneurs are the best thing in the world. I'm like,
I
7 years
think
into, I was like, hey, there's some more considerations here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been really like I'm not married, I don't have kids. I have a, long-term amazing girlfriend, but I've been very blessed where like I can assume a ton of risk with very little downside. Like my risk has been very asymmetrical historically. And what I tell people often is like if you want to be an entrepreneur and you're in a situation where if you try something and you fail and in a year or two you're really no worse off because you get a similar or slightly worse job than the one you had before, like what do you have to lose? I think there are people that are in situations where they take on enormous amounts of debt, personal guarantees, they risk the house, they got young kids. Like I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I think when your risk is clearly not um when you have real downside, I think it's really worth considering like how much risk are you assuming as an entrepreneur, and is that something that your life can support, and are you okay with that? Um, and then I think if you aren't comfortable with uncertainty and you want to be told what to do and show up every day and do it and leave that at the door at 5 o'clock, like W-2 is good for you, man. And there's nothing wrong with being a W-2 employee. I mean, I've done that, and um, I think that every business needs great W-2 employees, and there's plenty of people that want to work from 9 to 5 and go home every day and not have to think about work, and have a bunch of hobbies outside of work, and if you don't want to be kind of consumed by what you're building for a long period of time, then you know don't be an entrepreneur, and that's cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting just the risk profiles of getting into it, and everyone it's so personal.
Yeah.
And when we started our first business, we were just about to have our first kid, and we had left investment banking and law. I'm like, I am perfectly happy to go off and get a job. And then my wife basically said, if you're 75 and you don't start this, you'll be kicking yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's like this regret minimization framework.
Yeah,
Um,
Tim Ferriss has a really good exercise called fear setting for it, where it's like we all set our goals, right? But like when you can really paper your fears, but also like the 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 reality of your fears of really, okay, what's the worst case scenario here? And in most situations, it's really not that bad.
Man, this has been awesome. I appreciate you taking the time to run through the gamut of topics.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, I've
if
really
you
enjoyed it.
if, is there maybe a concluding thought, a quote, or just kind of something that you'd like to kind of part with the audience with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing we talked about today that I like to share with people is humans are super capable of change across every area of life in my experience. And if there's an area of your life you want to change, like find someone else who's changed that. Find the playbook. The playbook's out there forever. It is you want to change, whether it's your career, your business, your fitness, your substance use, whatever, and just follow the directions. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to build IKEA furniture without the manual, and life's a lot easier when you follow the manual, and then you can improvise.
You know, I'm gonna make sure that Jing hears this because I never read the instruction manual, and I probably should.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, there's some areas of life where you got some experience or you don't really care, and it's like, free will it. But in my experience, when I really want to do something, perfect example is like you probably couldn't do a half or a full Ironman if you just decided, hey, I'm gonna run, bike, and swim a lot and see what happens. Like you could, but it wouldn't be as uh you wouldn't get there as quickly, and it would probably be a lot more painful.
I think that's a great place to end this.
Awesome.
All right, man. Great to see you.
All right, buddy. You too. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
For sure. See ya.